time my brother stood up at that dinner table and slid a folded piece of paper across to me, I had already taken a photo of every document in the house that had my name on it. He didn't know that. Nobody did. I just sat there, unfolded it slowly, and read it. Then I set it down, picked up my fork, and finished my green beans. The look on his face when I didn't cry, I'll remember that for the rest of my life. Let me back up. I'm the older one. My brother Owen is 3 years younger, and my whole life, that gap felt like a canyon we were standing on opposite sides of. Not because we fought constantly, we didn't. It was quieter than that. It was the way my parents' faces changed when he walked into a room, like someone turned up the brightness on a screen. Owen was the charming one, the funny one, the one who could spill orange juice on the carpet and have my mother laughing about it 10 minutes later. I was the one who got straight A's and heard "good job" the way you'd say it to someone who held a door open for you. Polite, automatic, forgotten before it finished echoing. I don't say this to be bitter. I'm just telling you how things were, so the rest of this makes sense. Our dad passed away 6 years ago. Heart attack, sudden, no warning. He was 58 and had been planning to retire the following spring. He had a fishing trip booked in Montana. He never got to go. When he died, he left the house to my mother, which made sense. They'd been married 32 years. But he also left a separate account, a CD account he'd been building quietly for over a decade, and he split it between me and Owen. 50-50. My half came to a little over $40,000. I was 26 at the time, working as a dental office coordinator in Columbus, Ohio, making $31,000 a year and sharing a 2-bedroom apartment with a girl from work who kept passive-aggressively leaving dishes in the sink. I did not have savings. I barely had a buffer. That $40,000 felt like someone had handed me a lifeline. I did not spend it on anything frivolous. I want to be clear about that because later people would imply that I'd been reckless, that I didn't deserve what I had. I put most of it into a high-yield savings account and kept living exactly the same way for 2 more years. Same apartment, same job, same Tuesday nights, eating leftovers and watching whatever was free on Tubi. The thing that changed was my mother's house. She started struggling about a year after Dad died. Not dramatically, she wasn't falling apart. But she was 61, she'd never worked full-time outside the home, and Dad's pension covered the basics but not much else. The house needed a new roof. The property taxes went up. She called me one evening in January, and I could hear in her voice that she was embarrassed to be calling, which was somehow worse than if she'd just asked directly. I told her I'd help. We worked it out quietly, just the 2 of us at first. I would contribute to the mortgage each month. She was refinancing at the time. And eventually, to make it official and protect both of us, she added me to the deed, half owner. It was my parents' attorney who suggested it actually. He said it made sense given my ongoing financial contribution. My mother agreed. We signed the papers in his office on a Wednesday afternoon, and my mother cried a little and I squeezed her hand, and we went to Applebee's after and she ordered a margarita, which she never does. Owen didn't know. Or, he knew I was helping Mom in a vague way. He knew I gave her money sometimes. But he didn't know about the deed. Mom said she'd tell him when the time was right, and I said okay. Because I trusted her, and because I didn't think it would ever matter. That was my mistake. Not the trusting her. The not thinking it would matter. Owen had been living in Phoenix for 4 years with his girlfriend, Isabel. They seemed happy from what I could tell. He worked in solar sales, which he was apparently very good at, and Isabel did something with social media marketing. They had a nice apartment, a dog named Biscuit, a life that looked enviable from the outside. Then their relationship ended. I don't know the full story because Owen never told me, and I didn't push. What I know is that in October, Isabel moved out. By November, Owen had lost his lease. She'd been on it. Her name first. And by December, he was asking Mom if he could come home for a while. Mom said of course. She called me the night after she talked to him. I was in bed reading and I answered thinking it was going to be a check-in call. She told me Owen was moving back, just temporarily, just until he got back on his feet. I said that was fine. I said of course Mom, it's your home. What I did not fully register at the time was the word home. Singular. Mine too, technically, but I let it go because it felt petty to bring up ownership in the middle of my brother's personal crisis. Owen moved in right after New Year's. I visited in February for a long weekend, and I could already feel the shift. My old bedroom, the one I stayed in whenever I visited, the one with the blue curtains my mother had put up because she knew I liked blue, had been taken over. Not maliciously. Owen had just put some of his boxes in there, stacked against the wall, a few duffel bags on the floor. He'd set up his gaming monitor on the desk I used to do homework on. I slept on the pullout in the basement. I didn't say anything. In March, I drove up again because my mom had a routine procedure. Nothing serious, just something with her knee. And she needed help for a couple of days afterward. I took PTO, drove up Friday after work, and when I walked into the house, Owen was on the couch with a friend I didn't recognize. And there was a pizza box on the coffee table and a case of beer on the floor. And the energy in the room was the energy of people who lived there. That was fine. He lived there. But there's a difference between living somewhere and acting like you own it. The friend, whose name I never caught, looked me up and down and then looked at Owen and said, "Who's this?" And Owen said, "That's my sister. She comes around sometimes. She comes around sometimes. She comes around sometimes." That sentence stayed with me the whole drive home Sunday night. I turned it over in my head for 3 hours on the highway. She comes around sometimes. Not, she co-owns this house. Not, she's been helping pay the mortgage for 4 years. Not even just, she lives here too sometimes. She comes around. Like I was a neighbor who stopped by. Like I was a cat that showed up occasionally for food. I started paying attention differently after that. I noticed that the shelf in the front bathroom, the one where I used to keep a few things, a spare toothbrush, some face wash, had been completely taken over by Owen's stuff. Razor, deodorant, 3 different kinds of shampoo. Fine. I moved my things to the cabinet under the sink. I noticed that my mother had gotten into the habit of checking with Owen before making plans. Not explicitly, not out loud, but I'd call on a Saturday and suggest coming up, and she'd say, "Let me just see what Owen has going on this weekend." As if his social calendar somehow affected whether I could visit my mother. I noticed that he had started referring to the house as our place when talking to his friends on the phone. I heard him say it twice through the wall. "Come over to our place." The first time I told myself I was being oversensitive. The second time I took out my phone and made a note. I know that sounds like I was building a case. Maybe I was. But it didn't feel strategic at the time. It just felt like what you do when you're starting to understand something that you should have understood earlier. The thing that made it real, the thing that changed it from a feeling to a fact, was the afternoon I came home from a walk in April and found Owen sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of papers and a calculator and a look on his face that I recognized from childhood. It was the look he got when he was about to ask for something and had already figured out how to frame it. He asked if I wanted to sit down. I sat down. He said he'd been thinking about his situation. He said Phoenix hadn't worked out the way he planned and he was thinking about staying in Columbus long term. He said the house was plenty big enough, that Mom needed someone around full time, and that it would be easier for everyone if things were just formalized a little. I asked what he meant by formalized. He said he thought maybe he and Mom should refinance together. He said he looked into it and that he could probably qualify for a decent rate now that he'd been at his new job. He'd gotten a sales job locally 2 months in, and that it would make more sense going forward for the two of them to handle things. I said that I was on the deed. He looked at me like I'd said something in a foreign language. He said, yeah, but that was just a formality, right? That was just to help Mom out back then. I said it wasn't a formality. He said, well, it would just be cleaner this way. I sat with that for a second. Cleaner. My 4 years of monthly contributions to our mother's mortgage. The new roof, which I had helped pay for. The property taxes I had written a check for 2 Decembers in a row. Cleaner. Like I was a smudge on something. I said I needed to think about it. He said, sure, no rush. And then he went back to his phone, and I went upstairs and sat on the edge of the bed in my old room, the one that now had his boxes in it, and stared at the wall for a while. I called my own lawyer the next morning. Her name was Allison, and she'd done my will and my lease agreement 2 years ago, and I liked her because she was direct and didn't talk to me like I was fragile. I laid out the whole situation in about 8 minutes. She listened without interrupting. Then she asked me 3 questions, told me where I stood, and told me what to do. Where I stood, I owned half the house. Legally, cleanly, unambiguously, my name was on the deed and the refinanced mortgage from 3 years ago. Any attempt to remove me would require my consent in writing, and I had every right to refuse. What to do: get organized. Gather copies of everything. Make sure I had documentation of every contribution I'd made, and stop assuming that the people in that house were thinking clearly about what was mine. I spent the next 2 weeks doing exactly that. I went through my bank records going back 4 years and printed out every transfer I'd made to my mother's account. I printed the deed. I printed the mortgage documents. I put them all in a folder in my apartment, and I made digital copies, and I told exactly nobody. I kept visiting my mother. I kept being friendly to Owen. I kept showing up and doing the dishes and watching bad TV and acting like everything was fine because nothing had happened yet. I was waiting. In May, my cousin Julie got engaged, and the whole family decided to celebrate with a dinner at my mother's house. This is something we did, not regularly, but for occasions. My aunt, my 2 cousins, a couple of family friends, my mother, Owen, and me. I drove up the Friday before. I went to the grocery store with my mother. I helped her marinate the chicken and make the potato salad and set the table with the good dishes she only used for company. Owen barely helped with anything. He showed up in the kitchen once, ate a handful of chips directly from the bag we bought for the party, and said it looked like we had it handled. The dinner was nice, actually. My cousin was happy, her fiancé was sweet, everyone was laughing and eating, and my mother had put out these little candles along the center of the table that she'd bought at TJ Maxx. It was the kind of evening that would have just been a good memory if it had ended there. But after dessert, when it was just family, aunt, cousins, Owen, me, my mother, Owen refilled everyone's wine and sat back in his chair with the comfortable posture of someone who is about to say something he's been waiting to say. He said he had something to share. He said he'd been thinking about the future, about putting down roots, about being there for Mom. He said he was planning to make this his permanent home and that he and Mom had been talking about some changes that would make things more official. He looked at me when he said more official, just for a second. Then he said, and I want to be accurate here because I've replayed this many times. He said that for things to move forward the way they were planning, it would probably make the most sense for me to step back from the deed. He said it so casually, like stepping back from a deed was like stepping back from a game of cards. Oh, I'll sit this round out, no big deal. My aunt looked at me. My cousin Julie looked at me. Nobody said anything. My mother was looking at her wine glass. I took a sip of my water. Then I said, Owen, I'm not stepping back from anything. My name is on this deed because I've been contributing to this mortgage for 4 years. I have documentation of every payment I've ever made to this house, and I spoke with my attorney in April, so I'd actually love to hear what changes you and Mom have been planning because this is the first I'm hearing about any of it. The table went quiet in a way that a table full of family almost never goes quiet. Owen's face did something complicated. He'd expected me to be embarrassed. He'd expected me to hedge, to get flustered, to do what I'd done in childhood when he outmaneuvered me. Go pink in the face and say, well, I guess, or let me just think about it. He had read me using old information. He said I was being dramatic. I said I had the deed in my car if anyone wanted to see it. My aunt made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh, but wasn't not one either. Owen looked at my mother. My mother finally looked up from her wine glass. And in the look she gave him, I saw something I hadn't expected. She looked tired. Not of me. Tired of this. Tired of having agreed to something that she maybe hadn't thought all the way through. She said, quietly, Owen, I think we should have talked to your sister first. He said, Mom. She said, no, I mean it. We should have talked to her. That was not the end of it. I want to be honest about that because stories like this always end too cleanly in the telling. Real life doesn't wrap up at the dinner table. There were 2 more weeks of difficult conversations. Owen called me 3 times, twice to argue and once to apologize, though the apology was the kind that has a but in the middle of it. My mother and I had a long talk on the phone one Sunday where she cried. And I cried, and she said she hadn't meant for things to go this way. And I believe her. I do. What I understood by the end of those conversations was that my mother had gotten used to Owen being the one physically present. That presence had weight. It had become, in her mind, a kind of ownership. Not legally, not consciously, but in the quiet daily logic of who was there and who wasn't. And Owen had started to move inside that logic and expand it and call it his. I didn't sell the house. I didn't blow up everything. That's not who I am. What I did was get very clear in writing about what my ownership meant. Allison drew up a formal co-ownership agreement that spelled out contributions, responsibilities, and what would happen if either party ever wanted to sell or buy out the other. Owen signed it. He didn't want to, but he signed it. My mother signed it too. My old bedroom no longer has Owen's boxes in it. And I come home now, not around. Home. The last time I visited, I sat on the back porch with my mother in the evening, and she reached over and put her hand on mine and said, "I'm proud of you." I said, "For what?" She said, "For not letting it go." I thought about that on the drive back. About all the years I had let things go, the quiet dismissals, the backseat placement, the way I had made myself smaller and called it being the bigger person. I had spent a long time waiting to be seen by people who were looking in a different direction. And what I learned, slowly at a dinner table with a piece of paper in my hand, is that sometimes you have to stop waiting and just show them the deed. Not to be cruel, not to win something. Just to remind everyone, including yourself, that you were there all along. People talk about karma like it's something that happens to you, like the universe keeps a ledger and eventually balances it out on your behalf. I don't think about it that way. What I've come to believe, slowly and only because I lived through something that taught me, is that the consequences we experience are mostly just the logical result of the choices we made when we thought nobody was paying attention. Owen didn't lose his footing in that house because the universe punished him. He lost it because he spent years treating my presence as optional, my contributions as invisible, and my patience as invisible, and my patience as infinite. He built his version of reality on assumptions, and assumptions are not a foundation. They're just air shaped like something solid. The moment I put documentation on the table, the air disappeared, and I have to be honest about my own part in it. I let things go for a long time. I told myself it was generosity being the bigger person, not making things uncomfortable. But a lot of that was actually something quieter and less noble. I didn't want to have the hard conversation. I didn't want to sit across from my mother and say, "I need you to see me clearly." It felt like too much to ask for. So I kept making myself smaller and calling it grace. That's the thing about intelligence that nobody talks about enough. It's not just knowing facts or figuring things out quickly. Real intelligence is knowing when you've been operating on a false story and having the willingness to update it. For years, my story was keep the peace, don't make waves, let them figure it out eventually. That story cost me. Not just the house, but something harder to name. The daily quiet erosion of feeling like a guest in spaces where I had every right to belong. What I learned from Allison, from that Sunday morning phone call where she laid out exactly where I stood, was that clarity is not aggression. Asking for what is legally and fairly yours is not the same as being difficult. I had confused those two things for most of my adult life, and unlearning that confusion was harder than any conversation I had with Owen or my mother. The dinner table moment was not a victory. I want to be clear about that. My aunt's half laugh, Owen's expression shifting, my mother finally saying we should have talked to her first. None of that felt triumphant in the moment. It felt like something I wished hadn't been necessary. The best outcome would have been a family that communicated clearly from the beginning. That didn't require anyone to sit quietly for 4 years building documentation just to be taken seriously. But you work with the situation in front of you, not the one you wished for. What I carry forward is this: show up fully, document honestly, and don't wait for someone else to announce your value. Owen taught me that, ironically. He walked into a house with such complete confidence in his own claim to it that he never once considered the paperwork. That confidence, misplaced as it was almost instructive. He never apologized for taking up space. I spent 30 years apologizing for mine. I'm done with that now.